Think back to the teachers who really left a mark on you. More often than not, they were seasoned veterans, right?
Yeah, definitely. People with decades of experience.
That kind of quiet authority that only comes from years in the classroom. We often celebrate the wisdom and depth that comes with age and experience, especially in a role as crucial as teaching.
We absolutely do.
But what happens when age, that inevitable march of time, begins to introduce significant challenges to this absolutely vital role?
It's a question we don't always address directly, isn't it?
Not really.
We acknowledge the positives of experience, but the potential difficulties that can arise as educators age are...
Well, they're a complex reality.
Yeah.
Understanding these challenges is essential, not to diminish the value of veteran teachers, but, to understand the landscape they might be navigating.
Absolutely. And that's precisely what we're diving into today. We've been spending time with a fascinating source that takes a really candid look at the potential weaknesses that can surface in educators once they pass the age of 50.
Right. The source itself is clear. It's not about making broad generalizations or negative judgments.
No, its purpose, as stated, is to identify these potential issues, lay them out clearly.
So they can be understood.
Exactly. And ultimately addressed. And the source provides a really comprehensive framework, actually. It categorizes these potential challenges across a wide spectrum.
Right.
Well, from health and physical capabilities to mental and psychological states, social interactions, technical skills, the generation gap, teaching methodologies, even their involvement within the broader school organization.
Wow. Okay. So it's a pretty wide net.
It's a 360-degree view, yeah, strictly based on the points this source raises, of course.
Got it. So for you, our listener, whether you're involved in education as a student, a parent, perhaps you work in administration, or maybe you're an educator yourself, or just someone with a keen interest in how our schools function, this deep dive is designed to give you a much more nuanced understanding. We're pulling directly from this source to shed light on the specific potential factors that can influence the educational environment you experience or observe.
Exactly.
It might just offer some insight into the why behind certain difficulties that educators in this age group might face, all strictly according to the perspective presented in this material.
That's the key. It's this source's perspective.
Okay, are you ready to really unpack this?
Ready when you are. The source begins by grouping these potential challenges into several broad categories.
Okay.
Think of these as the foundational areas where age-related changes, according to the source, can start to introduce difficulties in the context of teaching.
Right. It lays out these initial categories. Health, physical, mental, psychological, social, technical, generation gap, teaching skills, and organizational involvement.
That's the list.
That's quite a framework to start with. Let's jump into the first one. Health-related weaknesses. This seems like the most immediately understandable area, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. As the source points out, it's a well-documented reality that as people age, the prevalence of chronic health conditions tends to increase.
Right.
And for an educator whose role is physically and mentally demanding, well, this can have a direct impact.
And the source is quite specific here, listing conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma.
Heart disease, too.
Yeah.
These are examples of the kind of chronic issues that become more common.
And they aren't just abstract concepts. They're ongoing health realities that require management, medication.
And can have unpredictable flare-ups, exactly.
Which links directly to job performance, right?
Yes, the source makes that link very clear. These conditions can directly lead to symptoms the source describes as fast fatigue and a lack of energy.
Oof. Imagine trying to manage a classroom with that.
Right. Maintaining student engagement, being reactive and present for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and constantly battling, feeling drained or tiring out quickly.
It fundamentally challenges that dynamic presence, doesn't it? The sustained energy that effective classroom leadership often requires.
Absolutely. It's a huge challenge.
And it's not just internal conditions either. The source highlights sensory impairments, which are incredibly practical challenges in a classroom setting.
Very practical. It specifically mentions vision problems, often requiring glasses, something many people experience with age.
Sure, happens to most of us eventually.
And reduced hearing.
And the classroom is built on communication, isn't it?
Totally. If a teacher is struggling to clearly read notes, textbooks, or even see student expressions from across the room,
or hear a quiet question from the back,
Exactly. Or if they have difficulty hearing those quieter responses or maybe interactions happening elsewhere in the classroom,
Yeah.
it directly impacts instruction delivery.
And gauging understanding.
Yes, and even managing behavior effectively. It can lead to misunderstanding or missed cues, big time.
The physical demand of simply being present is also noted difficulty standing for long periods to teach.
Yeah, this might seem minor to someone outside teaching, but
But it's not minor if you're doing it all day.
not at all. Picture a teacher who spends significant time at the whiteboard, circulating around desks or supervising activities. If standing causes discomfort or pain, it limits their mobility.
And how they structure lessons, maybe. Or interact physically.
Precisely. And the source even connects this back to lifestyle factors.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It suggests that a lack of consistent physical exercise can contribute to issues like obesity and joint pain.
Which then makes the standing and moving even harder.
Exactly. It exacerbates the physical capacity needed for the role. So the source presents health not just as specific diseases, but about overall physical resilience, which teaching really demands.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Okay, so moving from the specific health conditions to the more general physical capabilities, the source identifies physical weaknesses.
Yes, this category looks at overall physical capacity and agility. The source points to a lack of mobility and agility as key issues.
So like moving around easily.
Right. They might struggle with the physical aspects of navigating a school, maybe difficulty walking long distances or going uphill, which might be required for moving between buildings, getting to meetings.
Or even just participating in outdoor school activities.
Exactly. And the simple act of being in one place, whether sitting for planning or standing for teaching, the source says that can become painful.
Which limits their ability to remain comfortable and focused throughout the day, I imagine.
For sure. This discomfort can be a constant background distraction and make that sustained teaching presence much more challenging. The source also includes sleep problems, specifically mentioning insomnia within this broader physical category.
Okay, I could see that. Well, sleep feels mental too.
The physical toll of sleep deprivation is undeniable, right?
Oh yeah. Reduced concentration, slower reaction times.
Lower patience threshold,
Right.
and compounding that feeling of fatigue we just talked about.
So these physical challenges can create a kind of cascade effect.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. A cascade effect.
Which brings us neatly to the mental weaknesses category. Here, the source really delves into cognitive aspects that can be affected by age.
Right. Key challenges mentioned are difficulty concentrating and taking more time to absorb new material.
Concentration is absolutely vital in a busy classroom.
Absolutely. Maintaining focus, planning lessons meticulously, giving individual attention. If focus is harder to maintain, it impacts quality and presence.
And taking longer to grasp new information. That seems critical with education always changing.
It really is. It directly impacts their ability to learn new teaching methods, integrate updated curriculum content, or understand new educational policies or software.
The pace requires continuous learning, doesn't it?
It really does. You can't just stand still.
The source also highlights taking too much stress from small problems.
This sounds like a heightened reaction, maybe an emotional or cognitive thing.
Yeah, a heightened reaction to typical classroom disruptions.
Why might that occur, according to the source, or just logically? Well, the source doesn't explicitly state the why for this point, but one could infer it's a complex interplay. Perhaps years of accumulated stress reduce coping reserves.
Makes sense.
Or it could be linked to physiological changes that affect stress hormone regulation. Or maybe it's a psychological response, feeling less equipped to handle minor issues because of perceived weaknesses elsewhere.
So a small disruption feels bigger because they feel less agile or quick to respond.
Possibly, yeah. That heightened stress level isn't just difficult for the teacher. The source implies it can contribute to a tense or anxious classroom environment.
Right. And then there's the point about reduced desire to work, a decline in internal motivation.
Yeah.
This feels different from just physical fatigue.
It is different. Physical fatigue is about the body saying, I'm tired.
Okay.
Reduced desire is about the internal drive, the passion for the act of teaching itself. The source frames this as a lowering of willpower or enthusiasm.
What might cause that?
Yeah. Again, inferring from the context, it could stem from feeling overwhelmed by the challenges we're discussing, a sense of stagnation, feeling undervalued.
Or maybe just their focus shifting towards retirement.
That too. Perhaps their focus is naturally shifting towards the next phase of life. The source suggests it's a deeper, more pervasive sense of disengagement than just being physically tired after a long day.
That connects very closely to the next category the source identifies: Psychological weaknesses. This section really explores the emotional state and self-perception.
Yeah, it does. The source highlights a lack of confidence, specifically pointing to using new technology.
Okay, so it's not just not knowing how to use it.
Exactly. It's the psychological barrier, the fear of looking incompetent, maybe struggling in front of tech-savvy students or younger colleagues.
Or feeling embarrassed by their lack of familiarity.
Right. That can be a significant deterrent to adopting necessary tools, even if they know they probably should.
And the really poignant feeling the source mentions of being old or left behind or that their time has passed, that must be incredibly difficult to carry.
It really must be. Education is constantly evolving, isn't it? New research, new technologies, shifts in student culture.
Always something new.
If an educator feels they haven't kept pace, that their knowledge or methods are becoming obsolete, it can lead to a deep sense of inadequacy and isolation.
An emotional burden affecting self-esteem, professional identity.
Exactly. There's also mention in the source of feeling uneasy or awkward with school administration or younger colleagues.
Why might that tension arise?
The source suggests several possibilities. They might feel scrutinized by administration, maybe about adopting new policies,
Or judged?
perhaps. Or they might feel out of sync with younger colleagues' energy levels, their ideas, their social dynamics.
Which could lead to avoiding them.
Yeah, this unease can manifest as avoidance, defensiveness, or just a reluctance to fully participate in staff interactions. And that, of course, just increases their sense of isolation within the school community.
Which the source ties directly into a resistant mindset towards change.
Yes, and it clarifies this resistance isn't necessarily inherent stubbornness, though it might look that way.
So what is it then?
Psychologically, the source implies it can be a defense mechanism. Change requires energy, learning, adaptation, all things that might feel more difficult when facing other age-related challenges.
So resisting change is a way to preserve energy.
Could be. Or avoiding the discomfort of learning something new, or maybe just holding on to methods where they feel confident and experienced, even if those methods are becoming less effective now.
Okay, I see the connection there. Shifting gears a bit, the source looks at social weaknesses. How can age potentially impact social integration within the school community?
Well, the source notes less participation in social activities.
Like after-school events or staff room chat.
Exactly. School social dynamics can involve those things, informal gatherings. If an educator is less involved, maybe due to fatigue, discomfort, or just feeling out of place, they miss out.
Miss out on bonding, peer support.
And informal collaboration, too. Those things are important.
And a specific difficulty, mixing with the new generation. And the source says this applies both to students and younger teachers.
Yes, this is presented as a significant social hurdle. The norms, language, cultural references, social behaviors of younger generations can be quite different.
Making it harder to build rapport.
Definitely. Harder to build rapport with students and harder to mentor or collaborate effectively with newer staff. It makes it tougher to feel like a connected part of the contemporary school environment.
This can easily lead to a feeling of social distance or loneliness, which the source mentions.
Absolutely. Human connection is vital in any workplace, right? And schools are no exception.
Definitely not.
Feeling isolated from colleagues and students removes a key source of support, energy, and professional fulfillment. It can compound any existing mental or psychological challenges.
The source also points out feeling left behind in competition with young teachers.
Yeah. This taps into a perceived sense of relevance and value. Well, newer teachers might be highlighted for their mastery of technology or integrating modern pedagogy or just their fresh energy.
And older teachers might feel their experience isn't valued as much.
That's the implication. They might feel their extensive experience isn't being valued as highly in comparison, creating a sense of competition rather than, say, mutual respect and collaboration.
Which could make them withdraw. Or maybe become resistant to supporting newer staff.
Both are possible consequences mentioned indirectly by the source's framing.
That brings us to a category that feels particularly relevant today. Technological weaknesses.
It certainly is very relevant. The source identifies a lower inclination towards computers, mobile phones, and smart teaching tools.
So just less natural interest or comfort.
Potentially. For educators who completed their training and spent a significant portion of their careers in a less digitized era, integrating these tools might not feel intuitive or comfortable. It wasn't part of their initial skill set.
And the practical impact is huge. The source notes difficulty conducting online classes.
Which became a necessity almost overnight globally, didn't it?
Absolutely. and hassle using essential digital systems like online reporting, email, or school management information systems, MIS.
And these are no longer optional extras, are they? They're core components of teaching and school administration now.
Right.
Struggling with digital communication platforms makes interaction with students and parents harder. Difficulty with MIS systems, digital reporting, or e-attendance adds significant administrative burden.
Takes up valuable time.
Creates frustration for themselves and the school administration. It impacts their ability to participate fully in the digital workflow of the school.
And the source highlights being slow to update with the rapid development in information technology.
Yes, and this creates a widening gap, doesn't it? Technology doesn't stand still.
Not for a second.
So if you were slow to adopt in the first place, the source implies that the continuous rapid evolution means the distance between your current skills and what's considered standard or necessary just grows exponentially.
Making catching up feel even more daunting.
Exactly, and reinforcing that lack of confidence and inclination towards technology we mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a cycle.
Okay, let's unpack the generation gap further. The source calls this out specifically, distinguishing it from just social mixing. This is fundamentally about the distance between the educator and the students themselves.
Exactly. The source uses a powerful phrase here, describing it as a big distance.
In what ways?
In terms of time, thinking, trends, technology, and interests. Students today have grown up in a world saturated with information, digital interaction, rapid cultural shifts. Their frame of reference, communication styles, expectations for learning are all shaped by this.
Leading to difficulty understanding the needs and interests of current students, as the source states.
Precisely. If you don't connect with their world, it's incredibly challenging to make subject matter relevant, design engaging activities, or even just talk to them in a way that resonates.
And the source points out this can lead to an attempt to stick only to their own experience and style.
Right. While experience is invaluable, the source suggests relying solely on methods that worked decades ago without adapting them to the current student context can result in lessons that feel irrelevant, boring, or disconnected from students' lives.
So the wisdom of experience needs to be translated for the current generation.
That's a great way to put it. It needs translation.
And it specifically mentions difficulty understanding student psychology. This feels more profound than just not understanding their interests, like TikTok or whatever.
It is more profound. Understanding student psychology involves grasping their developmental stage, their emotional landscape, the pressures they face today, social media, academic pressure, all of that.
Their motivations, how they process information now.
Yes. If an educator struggles with this, according to the source, they might misinterpret student behavior, use ineffective motivational strategies, or fail to recognize signs of distress or learning difficulties.
Which impacts their ability to connect and support students on a deeper level. Now, how do these challenges manifest in the actual delivery of lessons? The source lists teaching skill weaknesses.
It points to a dominant one-way lecture style, a teacher-centered approach.
The classic sage on the stage.
Pretty much. This method, while traditional, often positions students as passive recipients of information. It contrasts sharply with modern pedagogical ideals that emphasize active student participation, collaboration, critical thinking.
And the source explicitly states a weakness in student-centered, ICT-integrated, and activity-based teaching techniques. Can you break down what the source means by these?
Sure. Student-centered approaches mean the learning activities and focus are built around the student's needs, interests, and active involvement. They're at the center.
Okay.
ICT integrated teaching is using information and communication technology, computers, internet, educational apps, digital whiteboards as tools within the teaching and learning process, not just an add-on.
Got it. And activity-based.
That involves students actively doing things, experiments, group projects, debates, simulations, rather than just listening. These require the teacher to be more of a facilitator, a guide, designing experiences.
Which is a different skill set than delivering a lecture.
Very different. The source also notes a lack of proficiency in new evaluation methods.
Meaning assessment, how they grade.
Yes. Assessment methods have evolved beyond just traditional paper and pencil tests. The source likely refers to methods like Continuous Comprehensive Evaluation, CCE.
What's that?
It focuses on ongoing assessment throughout the year, not just big exams, also things like portfolio assessments, performance-based tasks, and potentially using digital platforms for grading and feedback.
So if an educator is stuck on old methods,
they might not be effectively measuring what students have learned or providing timely, specific feedback.
And the source also mentions less attention to inclusive education and child-friendly behavior.
Right. Inclusive education is about actively creating an environment where students of all backgrounds, abilities, and learning styles feel welcomed, supported, and have their needs met.
Which might involve differentiating instruction.
Yes, or understanding specific learning challenges. And child-friendly behavior is about maintaining a positive, encouraging, respectful, and safe atmosphere for all students.
Requires sensitivity, patience.
And specific strategies, which the source suggests might sometimes be lacking in this context.
Okay. Finally, in this initial set of categories, the source addresses challenges related to contributing beyond the classroom. Organizational participation weaknesses.
Right. It starts with an unwillingness towards training.
We touched on this with technology and absorbing new material.
We did, but this points to a broader resistance to formal professional development opportunities. Perhaps, as the source implies, they don't see the value, feel it's too difficult, or just prefer their established ways.
And less interest in school-level planning, monitoring, and reporting.
Yeah. Schools thrive when staff contribute to their overall functioning and improvement, right?
Sure. Team effort.
Participation in curriculum committees, strategic planning meetings, or engaging with monitoring and reporting requirements is part of being a contributing member. A lack of interest, the source suggests, signals disengagement from the collective goals and administrative duties.
The source also notes a tendency not to understand new rules and regulations.
Education is a field governed by numerous policies, guidelines, administrative procedures.
Which can change pretty often.
Exactly, due to government mandates or school-level decisions. If an educator struggles to understand or keep up with these changes, the source indicates it can lead to non-compliance, confusion, and friction with colleagues and administration. It hinders the smooth operation of the school.
Okay, wow. That covered the first 9 broad categories outlined in the source.
It does, and as the source itself is careful to state, and it's vital we remember this,
Yes.
these weaknesses don't necessarily appear in all teachers over 50, nor do they all appear simultaneously in any single teacher.
Right. They're presented as potential aspects.
Potential aspects that can emerge with age. The source's purpose in identifying them is precisely so that, once understood, corrective measures can be considered to enhance teacher effectiveness.
So it's framed as challenges, not inevitable decline.
Exactly, not a universal indictment.
That's a really important distinction to keep in mind as we discuss this.
Yeah.
This isn't about stereotyping, but understanding potential hurdles based on this source.
Correct.
And the source doesn't stop there. It dives into additional potential weaknesses, getting more specific about behavior, interaction, and mindset. Let's explore these, starting with adaptability weakness. This seems to build directly on the earlier points about resistance to change.
It absolutely does, but it focuses specifically on adapting to structural and pedagogical changes. The source highlights being slow to adopt new curriculum, updated education policies, and new evaluation methods.
These are pretty fundamental shifts.
They really are. What and how teachers are expected to teach and assess, difficulty adapting to them means their practice can quickly become out of sync with current requirements, according to this material.
And a skeptical view towards every change that comes into the school. The source mentions this too. This isn't just slowness. It sounds like an inherent mistrust.
Yeah, or suspicion of new initiatives, which the source implies can be contagious within a staff and create obstacles for leadership trying to implement necessary improvements.
A skeptical mindset can shut down willingness to even try new things.
Or see their potential benefits, yeah. Hindering progress for the whole school community, potentially.
The source also mentions difficulty coordinating work with the new management team.
This can be a significant challenge. New leadership often brings new priorities, structures, communication styles.
And experienced staff might be set in their ways.
Exactly. Set in their ways and relationships, they might struggle to align with the new vision or work effectively within a changed administrative dynamic. The source suggests it can lead to friction, miscommunication, inefficiency.
Okay. Next, the source looks at communication and presentation, digging deeper than just verbal clarity.
It lists practical technological barriers like not knowing how to use digital communication tools, Zoom, Google Meet, learning management systems, LMS.
Things that are pretty essential now. What's an LMS again, exactly?
It's basically an online platform for managing courses, sharing materials, interacting with students, sometimes grading. Very common now. Not being able to use these is presented as a major functional gap.
And a general tendency not to use presentation tools like PowerPoint, video clips, or interactive media in the classroom.
Right. In a world where students are, accustomed to dynamic visual content, lectures without these tools can feel dry and disengaging, according to the source.
PowerPoint, video clips, interactive simulations. They can enhance understanding, can't they?
Hugely. Maintain student attention, too. Avoiding them means missing opportunities to make lessons more effective and relevant, as described here.
There's also hesitation to have open dialogue with students or parents mentioned.
Yeah, and this is crucial for building a supportive educational ecosystem, isn't it?
Absolutely. School-home connection.
Open communication allows teachers to understand student needs, address concerns, provide timely feedback, build partnerships with parents. Hesitation, the source implies, can lead to unresolved issues, missed opportunities for intervention, and a lack of trust.
What might cause that hesitation?
Could be insecurity, fear of difficult conversations, maybe just feeling overwhelmed. The source doesn't specify, but those are logical possibilities.
Okay. Moving on to lack of self-motivation. This revisits the earlier point about reduced desire, but adds a specific layer.
Yes, the source captures a very specific mindset here. It quotes the thought, essentially. What's the point of learning new things when it's time to retire?
Wow, that's quite direct.
It is. This perspective explicitly devalues continuous learning and professional growth, viewing it as maybe an unnecessary investment given their remaining time in the profession.
And this attitude then fuels a lack of enthusiasm and energy.
And a declining interest in personal improvement or study, just as the source outlines.
Right. If you internally decide that further learning or effort isn't worth it because retirement is close,
your drive for personal and professional growth naturally diminishes. This impacts their willingness to engage deeply with teaching, adopt new methods, or invest energy beyond the minimum requirements.
the source then lists administrative weaknesses, focusing on specific non-teaching duties.
Yes, this includes concrete tasks that the source says can become difficult. Filling out forms, providing details for reports, online reporting, using those MIS systems, or e-attendance.
Kind of the bureaucratic side of teaching.
Exactly. These administrative tasks are essential for school record keeping, funding, compliance. Struggling with them creates extra work for administrators and can lead to errors or incomplete data,
It also points to not understanding the concept and objectives of training.
which helps explain why that unwillingness towards training might exist, right? If the purpose of a training session, whether it's about a new teaching strategy, technology, or policy, isn't clear or valued, attending feels like a waste of time.
They might see it as irrelevant theory rather than practical tools.
That's the implication. And lack of effective dialogue with monitoring teams is another point here.
Monitoring teams, like evaluators.
Could be internal or external monitoring and evaluation processes. They're designed to assess performance and identify areas for support. If an educator is defensive, uncommunicative, or dismissive during these interactions, the source suggests it hinders the team's ability to get an accurate picture and offer appropriate support or guidance.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Next is time management weaknesses. How does this manifest in the classroom, according to the source?
The source notes not being able to effectively use time in class management.
Like transitions between activities, pacing.
Exactly. Struggling to transition smoothly, spending too much time on one concept, not allocating sufficient time for student practice or questions, or just general difficulty in pacing the lesson to fit the period and cover the required curriculum.
And difficulty using dynamic activities and multidimensional teaching strategies.
Yeah, those methods we mentioned, group work, simulations, project-based learning, often require careful timing and coordination to implement effectively.
So if time management is already a struggle,
Incorporating these more complex dynamic strategies becomes significantly harder, which might lead back to reliance on simpler, potentially less engaging methods like lectures.
the source connects this directly to not being able to provide current, time-appropriate, result-oriented teaching.
Yes, that's presented as the outcome. If time is mismanaged and teaching strategies aren't dynamic or suited to current goals and student needs, the effectiveness of the teaching is reduced.
Making it harder for students to achieve the learning outcomes.
Within the expected time frame, yeah. The inefficiency impacts the results, according to this analysis.
Now looking at presence and perception, physical presence and discipline weaknesses.
This covers observable behaviors. The source mentions a tendency to come late regularly or take frequent leave.
Which impacts consistency and reliability. Crucial in a classroom.
Absolutely. And carelessness in dress, grooming, or presentation.
Yep. It feels a bit subjective, but I see the point about professionalism.
While individual style varies, the source suggests a general lack of attention to professional appearance can impact how students perceive the teacher's professionalism and authority. It contributes to the overall classroom environment and sets an example.
And the source links these points to ultimately not being an inspirational presence in the eyes of students or parents.
Right. Teachers are often role models, aren't they?
Supposed to be, yeah.
If their physical presence, punctuality, enthusiasm, and overall demeanor project fatigue, disinterest, or a disorganization, the source implies it diminishes their ability to inspire students, command respect, and build positive relationships with parents who see them as leaders in their children's education.
Okay, let's examine interactions with colleagues, teamwork, and leadership weaknesses.
The source lists difficulty collaborating with colleagues. Teaching can be, or maybe should be, a collaborative profession.
Planning together, sharing resources.
Supporting each other with challenging students. Difficulty working effectively in a team hinders these processes, and, the source suggests, can create interpersonal friction within the staff.
And it notes both a fear of taking leadership and displaying stubborn behavior.
Yeah, these can seem contradictory, but maybe they're two sides of the same coin, perhaps rooted in insecurity or resistance, as the source frames it.
Fear of leadership from feeling overwhelmed or lacking confidence.
Possibly. Or not having the energy for extra responsibility. Stubbornness could be a defensive reaction when challenged, or asked to change a way of asserting control when feeling insecure or resistant.
A particularly concerning point here mentioned in the source is the tendency not to let young teachers move forward.
Yes, that's highlighted as actively detrimental to the school's future and staff morale.
How might that manifest? It could be withholding information, being unsupportive, maybe even actively undermining younger colleagues. The source implies this behavior might stem from insecurity, jealousy, or that sense of competition we discussed, but it harms the overall development and vitality of the teaching staff.
Right. Next, the source explores the mindset around continuous learning, lack of development-oriented thinking.
The source explicitly states they may not understand the concept of lifelong learning.
Which is pretty key in education, isn't it?
Absolutely. In a rapidly changing field like education, the idea that learning stops after initial training is, well, it's outdated. Lifelong learning is the understanding that continuous professional development is necessary to remain effective and relevant.
And the source says they might be distant from concepts like research, innovation, and inquiry-based learning.
Yes, and these concepts are central to modern pedagogical discourse. Research informs best practices. Innovation involves trying new approaches. Inquiry-based learning focuses on students asking questions and investigating.
So if an educator is uninterested or unfamiliar,
their teaching practice is likely to remain stagnant and potentially less effective than methods informed by current understanding, according to the source.
leading directly to not updating one's knowledge, skills, or behavior, this is where the cumulative effect really shows.
Exactly. A lack of interest in development, combined with difficulty absorbing new information and resistance to change. The source paints a picture where their professional practice can become increasingly outdated over time,
Impacting their ability to meet the evolving needs of students and the education system.
That's the core concern highlighted.
Let's touch on emotional control weaknesses, linking back to mental and psychological aspects.
Right. The source highlights getting angry easily at students.
That can create a bad classroom climate fast.
Definitely. A climate of fear or anxiety damages student-teacher relationships. It's counterproductive to learning. Managing one's emotions in a challenging environment is a core teaching skill.
And not being able to tolerate criticism.
Yeah. Feedback, even constructive criticism, is essential for growth. If defensiveness or anger is the response, the source implies opportunities for improvement are shut down.
It also mentions a tendency to argue with school administration or parents.
Right. While disagreements happen, the source suggests a consistent pattern of argumentative behavior disrupts necessary collaboration and problem solving.
Within the school community and between school and home.
Yes, it can stem from feeling challenged, misunderstood, or defensive based on the context.
How does that lack of development thinking impact practical teaching? The source lists creativity and innovation weaknesses,
The source notes an inability to design new learning activities.
leading to predictable, maybe boring lessons.
Potentially, yes, lessons that may not cater to different learning styles or engage students in novel ways. Creativity in designing activities keeps lessons fresh and stimulating.
And sticking only to rote memorization techniques based on old books. The source mentions this specifically.
Yes, as an example of outdated pedagogy. Rote memorization has a limited place in education today compared to focusing on understanding, critical thinking, application.
So relying solely on those old methods means students aren't developing deeper skills.
That's the argument presented. They aren't developing the deeper cognitive skills they need.
And consequently, the source says, not playing a role in developing students' creative capacity.
Right. Teachers are meant to nurture the whole child, including their creativity. If the teacher's own practice lacks creativity and innovation, the source suggests they are less likely to model it, encourage it, or design opportunities for students to develop their own creative problem-solving skills.
Finally, in this section, the source introduces a powerful concept that seems to encapsulate many of these issues: retired mentality.
Yes, this refers to a psychological state where the educator has mentally checked out or significantly reduced their investment in the role, even while still physically present.
Like they're already retired in their head.
Kind of, yeah. The core thought identified in the source is there's not much time left, which it says reduces their work capacity. It's a form of psychological disengagement driven by anticipating retirement.
And it's reinforced by that thought, there's no point in learning new things now, which we saw linked to lack of motivation.
Exactly. This mindset, as described, creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Believing there's no future investment to be made reduces current effort and openness to new ideas,
Potentially leading to a decline in performance.
which might then reinforce the initial feeling that it's time to disengage, a negative cycle.
The source adds a specific consequence: not showing interest in preparing capable successors.
And this has a long-term negative impact on the school. Experienced teachers hold valuable institutional knowledge. They can mentor newer staff.
But a retired mentality means this knowledge transfer might not happen.
Or the support for the next generation of educators, right? Leaving the school less prepared for the future when they eventually leave. That's the implication.
Wow. So these additional points really layer on top of the initial categories, providing a more detailed look at how mindset, behavior, and specific interactions can create challenges, according to this source.
They really do. It paints a very comprehensive picture.
Right. And the source goes even deeper, labeling some as deep and subtle problems. These are often linked to more fundamental biological, psychological, social, and even linguistic factors that might not be immediately obvious, but have profound implications for teaching effectiveness.
Yes, these are marked with a different symbol in the source material, suggesting they're seen as perhaps more ingrained or complex.
And they are quite insightful, delving into areas we might not normally consider. Let's revisit the impact of generation gap, but this time focusing on the more subtle effects highlighted in this section.
Okay. The source really underscores that big distance here in time, thinking, trends, technology, interests, noting it's a fundamental disconnect.
And it emphasizes how current students are significantly more tech-dependent.
Yes, and that older teachers, according to the source, may struggle to even understand this fundamental shift in student reality. It's not just about using a computer.
It's about grasping how digital life shapes them.
Exactly. How it shapes student identity, communication, learning processes.
Leading to the educator's feeling of being outdated, left behind. The source mentions this psychological impact again.
It does, and it notes a consequence for student interaction. Dialogue can be reduced because students perceive the teacher as having old thinking.
That's a subtle barrier to connection, isn't it?
Very subtle, where students might not feel heard or understood, or might just disengage because they feel the teacher is out of touch.
There's also student dissatisfaction, specifically mentioned over the teacher not using technology. It's become an expectation now.
It really has. For digital native students, the source suggests a classroom without technology integration can feel less relevant and less engaging.
Not just a minor preference, but something that impacts engagement.
Yes, it can contribute to student disengagement and a perception of the teacher as ineffective or unprepared for the modern classroom. This section shows the generation gap isn't just about different pop culture references. It has tangible impacts on interaction, perception, and the learning environment itself, according to this material.
Now, this next section is incredibly detailed and looks at very specific, tangible manifestations of age-related changes. Problems created by speech, gesture, and movement. These are subtle, but can have a big impact.
They truly get into the nuances of communication and presence. The source breaks this down into 3 areas. First, speech problems.
What kind of things?
It lists things like repeating words, giving examples like yes, 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 or and then, and then, and then.
Okay. and getting stuck mid-sentence or forgetting what they were going to say next.
Right, which disrupts the flow of instruction and can signal difficulty with cognitive processing or retrieval. The source also notes physical issues, like spitting while speaking, unclear pronunciation, and changes in voice like trembling or becoming very soft.
How do these subtle speech changes affect clarity and confidence in communication in front of a classroom?
The source suggests they significantly undermine effectiveness. Repeating words or getting stuck makes the teacher sound hesitant or disorganized.
Spitting or unclear pronunciation would be distracting.
Or difficult for students to follow. A trembling or weak voice lacks authority and can make it hard for students to hear, especially in a larger classroom. It impacts the teacher's ability to command attention and convey information clearly.
Potentially leading to frustration for everyone involved.
Exactly, both teacher and students.
Then, gesture problems. The source mentions facial expression becoming slow.
Yeah, and nonverbal cues are vital, right, for conveying enthusiasm, seriousness, emotion.
If expressions are slowed, the teacher might seem less engaged.
Or their intended emotional message might not register with students. The source also mentions disorganized hand or mouth gestures.
How would that look?
Maybe random or uncontrolled movements that can be distracting and make the teacher appear nervous or erratic, disrupting the visual focus.
The source also notes anger or irritability reflecting visibly on the face.
Which immediately sets a negative tone, doesn't it?
Yeah. And unexpected physical movements that seem to have no reason.
All these affect how the teacher is perceived and can create discomfort or confusion, according to the source.
And finally, under this point, movement problems. Walking slowly or stumbling.
This can impact their ability to move around the classroom, assist students individually, or supervise activities effectively. And the source makes a striking observation.
What's that?
Fear or hesitation among students when the teacher moves forward.
Really? Why would that be?
The source implies the teacher's physical movement might inadvertently be perceived as unpredictable, unsteady, or even slightly alarming by students, creating a subtle sense of unease.
Wow. It also notes slowing down in routine activities in the classroom.
Simple things, right? Distributing papers, writing on the board, transitioning between different parts of the lesson.
If these become slow or cumbersome.
It disrupts the pace of the class, reduces the amount of material that can be covered, and can lead to student impatience or disengagement. These subtle physical and communicative issues, detailed in the source, illustrate how age can impact the very mechanics of classroom presence and interaction.
The source then delves into potentially more serious psychological aspects.
Yeah.
Signs of mental disorder, psychological imbalance. This sounds quite heavy.
It is a critical section, yes. It describes specific signs that the source suggests could indicate deeper issues. One is anxiety and restlessness.
How does that manifest?
Physically, as described here, sudden difficulty breathing, feeling restless with physical dryness, nose, chest, mouth, and even an inability to teach immediately due to a state of stress.
That sounds like more than just nerves, like maybe anxiety attacks?
The description certainly points towards something significant like that, yes. These aren't minor nerves.
The source lists spitting again, but frames it here as potentially linked to psychological imbalance or mental disorder.
Yes, it links it to increased saliva production due to changes in salivary glands in old age and the resulting discomfort for students.
So a physical change with psychological and social consequences?
Exactly. Framing it here might suggest that the lack of control over this physical manifestation contributes to or is exacerbated by psychological stress, or perhaps embarrassment about it adds to the stress.
A particularly challenging behavior noted is blupping or involuntary sounds. The source describes uncontrolled sounds from the mouth, like loop, oi,
Uh-huh.
These involuntary vocalizations are described as disruptive, and the source explicitly points out their potential to become a subject of humor among students.
Oh dear. Imagine trying to teach through that.
Exactly. Trying to maintain authority and teach effectively if you are unintentionally making strange noises that cause students to giggle or lose focus. The source suggests it can severely undermine the teacher's position and the learning environment.
It also lists repeating words, echolalia-like, repeating phrases like and then, or after that, after that. Yeah, while labeled echolalia-like, which clinically often means repeating others' words, here it seems to refer to involuntary repetition of one's own words or phrases,
Which disrupts the flow.
makes communication inefficient. The source says expression unclear, time wasted, and potentially signals cognitive or neurological changes affecting speech and thought organization.
Then the source notes alarming cognitive issues like sudden cognitive blank, forgetting what was just said, not staying on topic, asking oneself aloud, what was I saying?
These are presented as significant impairments to delivering a coherent lesson. Forgetting key information, losing your train of thought, drifting off topic,
Makes it impossible for students to follow.
and severely impacts the teacher's credibility and effectiveness. It suggests a potential issue with memory, focus, or cognitive processing that goes beyond simple absent-mindedness, according to this material.
And finally, changing topic mid-sentence, suddenly shifting from one subject to another, connecting irrelevant things.
This is another manifestation of potential cognitive disorganization described in the source. Abrupt topic shifts make the lesson impossible to follow logically.
Students get confused, attention drifts.
Because the content seems disconnected, these cognitive symptoms described by the source are perhaps the most devastating to the core function of teaching.
Moving on to behavioral problems. How external interactions can cause internal pain or lead to difficult reactions.
The source highlights getting mentally hurt by student jokes, indiscipline, or even simple questions.
So things that might roll off another teacher's back hit harder.
Potentially. While teachers need resilience, the source suggests that for aging educators facing other vulnerabilities, these common classroom challenges might feel more personal, leading to emotional pain.
This can lead to a deep disappointment of, they don't understand me, as the source puts it.
Yeah, that reflects a profound sense of alienation. When communication styles differ, or when the teacher feels their experience or perspective isn't valued, it can lead to this sad realization.
That the students they're trying to connect with fundamentally misunderstand them.
Which is deeply isolating, that feeling of being unheard or undervalued.
The source notes awkward reactions like awkward laughter, becoming silent when a response is needed, or getting angry without clear reason.
These are presented as maladaptive or inappropriate responses to classroom situations. Instead of responding appropriately,
They might laugh uncomfortably, withdraw, or react with disproportionate anger.
yes. These reactions are confusing for students, damage rapport, and undermine the teacher's ability to manage the classroom effectively, based on the source's description.
Let's look at lack of self-control, described as a loss of ability to manage one's own state.
This includes losing control of emotions, perhaps sudden outbursts of frustration or sadness, tying back to points about irritability and difficulty handling stress.
And a notable point mentioned, speaking excessively personal things in class, sharing private illnesses, fatigue, or pain with students.
Right. While building rapport involves some appropriate self-disclosure, the source indicates excessive sharing of personal problems, especially health issues or fatigue, crosses professional boundaries.
It could make students uncomfortable.
Or burden them unnecessarily, and it can also undermine the teacher's perceived strength and authority. The source frames it as suggesting a breakdown in professional self-regulation.
Finally, to conclude this deep section, the source notes self-doubt, self-blame, the internal narrative that can emerge.
This includes negative self-talk. The source gives examples like thoughts of, I can't do it anymore, I'm old and useless, or I need care and shouldn't be working.
Wow, that's heartbreaking.
It reflects low self-efficacy, internalized ageism, and a sense of dependency or inadequacy.
And experiencing deep disappointment in oneself, feeling irredeemable.
Yes, a state of significant emotional distress described here. A sense of profound failure or regret about their perceived inability to perform the role as they once did or as is now required.
The source adds a particularly poignant detail here, wanting to retire but not being able to say so.
That speaks to a silent struggle, doesn't it? Recognizing their own difficulties, perhaps feeling it's time to leave, yet being unable to articulate this desire.
Why might that be?
Perhaps due to financial constraints, a sense of obligation, fear of disappointing others, or maybe just not knowing how to navigate the retirement process. It's presented as a hidden emotional burden that compounds their challenges.
These final points, described as deep and subtle problems in the source, really highlight the profound interplay between biological aging, psychological state, social interaction.
And the ability to perform the complex role of an educator, yeah. The source's detailed descriptions of speech, gesture, movement, and cognitive issues are particularly insightful.
Showing how age can impact the very core of communication and classroom management.
In ways that aren't always immediately obvious or easily attributed to simply incompetence. The source strongly implies that understanding these underlying factors is crucial for a fair assessment of the challenges faced.
That really adds so much depth and complexity to the picture, doesn't it? We've moved from the more general physical and mental health challenges through issues with technology, social interaction, adaptability, communication style.
Right down to these deeply subtle psychological and behavioral manifestations that can impact the teacher's presence and effectiveness in powerful ways.
It provides a comprehensive, albeit challenging view of the potential landscape for aging educators, as depicted in this specific source.
It really does. It's a reminder that age-related changes can manifest in numerous, sometimes unexpected, ways within a demanding professional context like teaching.
And it's absolutely critical, as the source itself stresses, and as we should reiterate,
Yes.
that these potential weaknesses do not necessarily appear in all teachers over 50, nor do they all show up at once in any individual. They're presented as potential tendencies that can emerge.
Exactly. And the source's underlying message seems clear. Identifying and understanding these potential difficulties is really the first step.
The purpose isn't to label or dismiss.
No, but to recognize the challenges so that appropriate corrective measures can be considered and implemented to help these experienced educators maintain their effectiveness and well-being.
The source even goes further, suggesting that solutions and management measures are available and can be provided if needed.
Framing these challenges as addressable, not as inevitable declines leading to necessary departure.
That's a hopeful note.
It is, and it concludes with a powerful reminder about the broader context and shared responsibility. The source highlights the absolute necessity of support, sympathy, and cooperation.
From whom?
From school management, government bodies, and even family members. It frames providing this support as crucial for continuously motivating such teachers and helping them remain engaged and effective in their teaching roles.
So it's not just an individual issue.
No, it requires systemic and community support, according to this material.
That really is a vital takeaway. It shifts the perspective from focusing solely on the individual teacher to considering the environment and support structures around them. As we think about the future of education, about evolving methods and the constant influx of new technology, and as we also value the immense wisdom and experience that our veteran educators bring.
Which is considerable.
Absolutely. It leaves us with a key question to ponder, doesn't it? How can our educational systems and communities better recognize, understand, and proactively support the unique challenges faced by aging educators?
Ensuring they have the tools, the training,
And the empathetic environment they need to adapt, continue contributing their invaluable experience, and connect effectively with the students of today and tomorrow.
That's the question, isn't it? A question worth exploring and essential for building a resilient and inclusive educational landscape for everyone.